Hey guys, Cribbin Governor from the Gut Health Gurus podcast. I've got a background in food science, and today we have a long awaited guest, Dr. Catherine Clinton. I've been wanting to talk to Catherine for many years now, and finally the stars have aligned, and I have this brilliant opportunity to have Catherine on the show. Dr. Catherine Clinton, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
My absolute pleasure. And I must say, I just love your voice. Your voice is so soothing. So thank you for sharing this gift to the world.
Well, thank you. Thank
And
you.
and at the start of the show, I'd like to explore straight from the horse's mouth, who is Dr. Catherine Clinton?
Well, I am a licensed naturopathic physician here in Oregon, and I have an interest in quantum biology. And that, to me, really, I mean, we can get into what that is on a bigger scale, but to me, it really is about fostering relationships with the world around us for better health. And when I was in naturopathic medical school, it was my second year, and it was sort of that initiation year where long hours, um, you know, you got to be there at 7 a.m. If you are a minute late, then you don't pass the class, have to take it next year, sort of weeding out year, right? And it was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. I was diagnosed with two autoimmune conditions, Hashimoto thyroiditis, which affects the thyroid gland, and ulcerative colitis, which affects the colon, as well as Lyme disease. So I was in a perfect spot to be diagnosed because I was in naturopathic medical school. I was across the river from an acupuncture school. I was right down the hill from a very progressive allopathic MD teaching hospital. But and I was able to go from a very debilitated state back to sort of that productive member of society, able to see patients in clinic, finish schooling. But for many of us who've been diagnosed with something like that, we know that that isn't the picture of health. While it's wonderful to be productive again and be able to resume regular life, it's not necessarily the picture of health, right? And that's where I was at. And that's where I started really looking at quantum biology. And I had a doctor that I was doing clinical rotations with, and she was actually my physician as well. And she was pushing me to look at psychoneuroimmunology. That's just a big word for how our thoughts impact our health. And it was looking at mitochondrial research where I saw the bridge of through Martin Picard and his research on how our thoughts and emotions impact our mitochondrial health. And I was also looking at some quantum biology research about coherence in living systems. And it all just sort of, threw me into this world of quantum biology. And I haven't left. It's so fascinating.
Wow, there's so many things to unpack there. There's a lot of I would say complex terminologies that people might not fully understand. So how about we firstly define, it's a bit of a long word, but psychoneuroimmunology. I must say I've never actually come across that before. So what is psychoneuroimmunology from a lay
Yeah,
term?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a mouthful, right? And it's just a word talking about how our thoughts and emotions, how our reactions impact our biology, our physiology, right? So the research really focuses on how our thoughts and emotions can lead to inflammatory cascades that impacts our immune system. And then it's this positive feedback loop where our immune system then starts to cascade in inflammatory ways, and that impacts our brain function and our emotional state. So it's this really sort of tight positive feedback loop that for some people, especially myself, when I was diagnosed, I was like, what is going on? Going from a normal, um, healthy 23-year-old to this really debilitated state. And at the time, it would have been really nice to have learned that my thoughts and emotions, my stress level, how stress impacts disease state is really foundational to healing and to maintaining a healthy life. And so that's really what that big, huge word is, psychoneuroimmunology. It's just how our thoughts and reactions and even those subconscious trains of thoughts that we don't think about all the time, right? That are just kind of running in the background, how those impact our health and our healing and symptoms and disease states.
I think the audience and myself included will also appreciate that when we feel stressed or we feel overwhelmed, often we end up with some form of illness, whether it's a cold or, in extreme cases like yourself, severe illnesses like Lyme's disease and whatnot. I think you spoke about a couple of gastrointestinal conditions as well. So I think we can appreciate it, but I think as the science is evolving, we're starting to understand this very complex interaction between the gut and the brain. And I think we'll definitely cover that topic a little bit further on in the conversation. But so what strategy, because I think the audience would be dying to know. So what strategies did you actually use to overcome these illnesses? Because you could be an audience member listening now and saying, geez, I'm suffering with Lyme's at the moment. Or did you mention Crohn? No, it wasn't Crohn's, it was
Ulcerative colitis. Yeah.
ulcerative colitis. So it's a lot of our audience members are interested in gut health, so perhaps they're struggling with that. So what strategies did you use to overcome these conditions?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it started with repairing the gut, right? So I had, um, which is so common, I had a dysbiotic gut flora, right? It was not that beneficial sort of community of the microbiome in the gut. So I had to address that. I had to look at some of the food I was eating and some of those traditionally inflammatory foods. Now, that doesn't mean that I uh, gave those up forever, right? But in that moment where it was like, I just need a pause button on this. I need to get over that obstacle and um, just see some sort of light at the end of the tunnel, right? So I looked at my diet. I made sure that I was getting what a microbiome would need, right? Lots of color in the diet, um, lots of things to help rearrange that microbiome. And to be honest with you, when I was first diagnosed, I did a round of steroids for a few weeks, right? So I was on prednisone, and that's something that I use with my patients occasionally because it can do that pause button, right? It can shut that immune inflammatory response down. Now, that is not something we want to do long term, and steroids are not the answer, in my opinion. Lots of people are on long term steroid use, and that has a whole host of issues. But when you have somebody losing weight and in critical condition, having that sort of pharmaceutical help can be really helpful. So I did do that for 3 weeks. And then I sort of transitioned into natural anti-inflammatories, right? Looking at omega-3 fatty acids, anything that would help that inflammatory state. Again, those colors rich in, or those foods rich in color. And So those were sort of the physical pieces, right? I did some botanicals that help heal the gut. I focused on butyrate, which can be really helpful for gut health. But for the psychoneuroimmunology piece, I was actually resistant, when my attending physician was like, you need to look at this. I was like, don't you have like another supplement or maybe an acupuncture treatment? Because I was doing acupuncture as well. Uh, but that was something that was really helpful because it became very clear, more than a food, more than a supplement, my stress levels had a direct and immediate impact on my gut health. And so that was something that was really important that I learned to look at. And it wasn't that I became, a guru, a Zen master, even just the observation of this is how you are reacting to stress. This is your sort of subconscious train of thought that you picked up as a kid. Just even observing that, not even changing it allowed such room for healing. Because I think when we hear that, and when I heard it, I was like, oh no, like I have anxious thoughts, and my train of thought isn't this beautiful, endless list of gratitude and Zen, right? Like, and if it's making me sick, like, how am I going to get better, right? But it was just the observation at first. And of course, a gratitude practice has been wonderful, heart coherence exercises, all of these things are wonderful. But I think it's important for people to understand, especially when they're first learning about this, it does not mean you go from where you're at mentally to, Zen master and a completely different train of thought. Just observing your internal dialogue, just that allows for healing.
Completely, Catherine. In complete agreement with all that you've mentioned there. And something that resonates with me is that you took the a conventional route via your practitioner at the time, your for want of a better word, your practicing physician using kind of allopathic medicine, which is completely fine. You know what I mean? There's so many different modalities, and to address the discomfort at the time you use something that was conventional, which is fine. So it's like people think it's like a zero sum game where we have to only use the Eastern styles or the more esoteric styles of treatment versus conventional. Why can't we use everything? You know what I mean? Because we're still learning. There's so much that we don't know. So if it provides comfort and it works, why not? And obviously, there's all all modalities come with some form of side effect or some worse than others. So it's perfectly fine. It's the same thing with antibiotics, you know. It could be detrimental in some cases. In some cases, it might save lives. So it's not like, oh, we definitely can't take antibiotics because it's going to wipe out our microbiome, you know. So we have to be cautious on how we approach these matters. So I highly encourage the audience to really delve deep and think about that. And then the other thing that really piqued my interest was that you you fully appreciate the emotional states, the internal dialogue that's happening, all those type of things that affect our health and how we and I think you mentioned it earlier, inflammation, disease pathologies, and I can resonate with that. And I haven't spoken about it for a long time because I think we're up to like episode 70 of the podcast, but people who probably listened to episode 1 and 2 would have heard my discussion around the impact of dealing with traumas, you know. So a lot of my own personal gut health journey and struggles came from dealing with childhood traumas, issues with mum and dad, internal dialogues, dealing with healing these psychological imbalances, these these struggles going on in the mind that lead to disease. So some of the modalities that I approach the audience might be quickly interested is things like, doing an acting class, or working on these traumas with a psychologist, those type of modalities that you might not realize are directly connected with the struggles and diseases that you're facing right now. So again, it's this holistic approach. It's not just dealing with the gut per se or the body per se, but also dealing with the mind. So thank you for bringing this very important topic back up from the early episodes now to the latest episode. So, is there any particular approaches from a psychological perspective that you'd like to bring to light with the audience?
Sure. I mentioned a gratitude practice. I mentioned heart coherence exercises by Heart Math. Both of those have been really helpful. When I was really ill, it was hard for me to sit and be mindful. I was uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable in my body. I was uncomfortable in my mind. Um, it was really hard to do that traditional sit down, cross-legged, observe your thoughts kind of meditation. And I found a lot of ease in some of the things that I was learning at the time. I was doing Qigong practices with the Chinese medicine practitioners in our school. And one of them is just a shaking exercise, right? You just sort of stand on your feet, you come up on the balls of your feet, and then you just drop and kind of shake. And you just go through from head to toe, and you're just deep breathing and shaking. And wherever you feel tension, you spend a little bit of time there releasing that with the shaking, with the breath. And that was really helpful for me because I was not so great at sitting there and meditating at the time, right? And so something like that was really helpful. Something that I've come back to a lot lately in the last few years that was really helpful at the time were chants, chanting, and mantras that these professors were, it was something that was offered extracurricularly, right? At the university I went to had a natural medicine program, a doctorate program, and they also had a doctorate of Chinese medicine. And so, um, and I was enrolled in both, but it was just way too much. I got sick, and I was like, I will go to the Qigong classes, right? And part of the Qigong classes that were offered were these chanting exercises. And that was something that was really amazing to experience a, a physical change. And again, I was in a place where it was hard to sit and meditate and experience that change. So to be in a group of people, to be chanting a mantra, maybe, or even just toning, like a vowel sound, like ah or oh, or whatever it might have been. After doing, I mean, maybe 25 intonations of that, it is a noticeable and dramatic change. There's a reset happening in the nervous system. There's a headspace that's created that wasn't there before. Those practices were really, really helpful. And I've come back to them in the last few years. Sometimes we get something that's amazing and then we get better and we forget about it. And then we remember, oh yeah, right. So my morning routine now, it's like go outside, put your feet on the grass and tone, and just tone. And so I look very strange from an outside perspective, but it's such a beautiful practice for our body, for our nervous system, for our physiology. And so I would really encourage people to find something that fits their constitution, right? This idea that we all have to have the same tools. Um, is problematic, right? There's so many different ways. Walking can be a wonderful meditation. Dancing, laughter. I mean, there's so many different snuggles. That's one of my favorite ways to
Mhm.
regulate the nervous system. So there's just
Completely.
so many. Yeah.
I completely agree. There's so many things that we take for granted. It's very simple things like human interaction. One thing I just wanted to highlight as well that people might not appreciate is actually expressing anger. That's something that's extremely underutilized and unappreciated and almost a social taboo in society. But what I found was going through my own struggles, having a lot of pent up anger that had built up from childhood, and someone said something to upset you, but you just kind of bite down and just hold it inside, and the anger tends to build up. And so having a practice that allows you to safely express anger with a psychologist or a practitioner, or even safely in an acting class or an improv class when you're expressing some darker emotions in a safe and controlled manner, is extremely, extremely powerful. And I would say one of the most powerful modalities that helped me to address a lot of my health issues. It sounds so weird, just like standing in a room and expressing anger authentically is going to be a healing practice. But I can tell you, this is 100% effective in working. And so the next part I wanted to jump into was more an esoteric realm, because when I look at your content on Instagram, and I highly encourage people to follow Dr. Catherine Clinton on Instagram, because she posts some amazing content and I love it. It's more on the esoteric side, when rather than mainstream, but I completely appreciate it. And I think you spoke about things like sound and using chanting. So I wanted to express, and this all ties in with the quantum biology aspects. But what's your opinion on sound, on frequencies, on these type of aspects, and then we'll jump into the grounding aspect as well, because let's explore sound. So how does sound impact our bodies, and how can it be used as a healing modality?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great question. And I also just want to agree with what you said about anger. And I think that it's like the meditation, like we all have this idea, like you sit down, you're cross-legged, you are quiet, you let the mind flow and emptiness and all this stuff. But I think the same thing applies for emotions, right? It's love, it's gratitude, it's contentment, but we don't talk. Our society's very uncomfortable with what we would term negative emotions, right? Which I obviously the quote signs, I don't think of them as negative. If we are embodying an emotion we have, that is bringing us into coherence, that authenticity of experiencing that emotion, welcoming that emotion and letting it flow can be so healing. So I think it's important that you brought that up, and it's important that people realize that anger and grief and frustration and all those things that, you know, people sort of shy us away from, like, no, 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 it's love and light and gratitude. Love and light and gratitude are great, but we're humans and we're meant to have all those emotions, right? And the problem with those emotions comes from shame or splintering them off and pointing them at someone or suppressing them. So I completely agree with you. And now I'll get on to the sound question. I just wanted to, I think it's so important for people to understand that, especially nowadays. There's a lot of reason to be angry and to have sorrow as humans, and it's important that we don't suppress that. So yes, completely agree with what you had to say. And now on to sound. Sound is a wonderful modality, and when I teach and treat patients with quantum biology. Quantum biology is just sort of the study of how the flow of electrons in the body, maintaining that negative charge through the mitochondria, of photons of light from our light environment, and phonons from sound. Uh, and of course, frequency of thoughts and emotions, like we were talking about before, but phonons from sound is sort of a really underappreciated piece of medicine. And the research is really robust and really significant, right? So what we're seeing is that sound can really act on our physical body, right? Sound is this idea that these pressure waves are moving through a medium, right? So we can hear each other right now because these pressure waves of sound are working their way through air and coming into our ears. But that's not the only part that they're working on, right? Sound is working on our cell membranes and what's happening internally to us. There's been some incredible research. John Stuart Reed and Professor Sunjul Ji did amazing research on low frequency sound. And they use low frequency sound externally, but I think it's important to mention that our heart creates low frequency sound when it beats. And what they found was that this low frequency sound allowed our red blood cells to bind oxygen more readily. So if we were able to have more oxygen in the body, have more oxygenation of tissues, right, which is really important to whatever disease state we're talking about, right? And they found not only did it bind more oxygen and bind it for longer, they found that this low frequency sound actually repaired some of the damaged red blood cells and uh, increase their life expectancy, right? So we have a red blood cell that's like new and healthy and robust, one that's kind of damaged and not working as well, and one that is um, damaged and dead and needs to be recycled, right? And so those ones in the middle, this low frequency sound actually help repair them back to that healthy state and help them stay around in the body longer. And so, and they found the same thing with white blood cells in the immune system on a smaller scale, right? The change wasn't as dramatic, but it's just such an incredible um, piece of research that sound can actually, and maybe even our heart beating, can create this ideal environment for the flow of oxygen and nutrients in the body and the capacity for these red and white blood cells to be repaired and work to their capacity. And that's just one research study, right? They've shown that the toning that we were talking about, the chanting, that increases nitric oxide in our nasal passages. And what that does is it increases our capacity to bring in oxygen when we breathe. And again, increasing the oxygen state of the body, right? And, you know, some people are like, so what? And it's like, well, think about when someone's in a dire state in a hospital, right? What's on their face? They are being supplemented with oxygen. It's a primary need for all of our biological processes. And having something as simple as humming or toning, being able to increase that oxygen state. It's also been shown to reset and regulate our nervous system through that vagus nerve. Increasing melatonin, which we really associate with sleep, which we should, right? It helps us get a wonderful restorative sleep where we are repairing what needs to be repaired. But it's also an antioxidant. It's also being produced and supplied to the body throughout the day, not only at night, because it is an incredible antioxidant in the body. So you have all these different things coming from sound. It's fascinating.
Mm, I agree, Catherine. I think people can appreciate sound in a simplified manner if you think just about music. Like the impact of music on our life and our culture. I even recall when I was going through acting school and doing exercises using music to get into different states. And music is and sound also has this quality of eliciting memories. So typically we hear a song and then it brings us back to a place that we perhaps our first date or your wedding or something like that, or it could be something even like on the negative side, where something traumatic happened, but music can bring these elements out. It's similar to smell. I think smell is also one of these things where it kind of can trigger memories and psychological impacts. So I'm not surprised at all that you've highlighted all these scientific studies that show that sound can have these healing qualities by boosting nitric oxide and whatnot, and the coherence in the heart as well. So thank you for bringing that up because I think most people might not be aware. Is there any other aspects of sound that you wanted to cover before we move on?
Oh, sound is it's just a fascinating topic because it's something that we've used since the beginning of our humanity, right? We've evolved over millennia with sound. And I think we're sort of at a place where not a lot of us are singing, not a lot of us are listening to our favorite musics, to going to a concert, right? And so you have all these different ways to access sound, from singing, from toning, from a musical concert that you enjoy. um, that low frequency sound that John Stewart Reed and Professor Sanjol G researched is actually present in a lot of popular music. And so, it's not that it has to be this traditional classical music, although if you like classical music, that's great. But just enjoying music has such immense health benefits. It's fascinating. Wearing headphones like you're wearing right there, not the earbuds that so many of us wear, right? But the ones that enclose the earlobe, the vibration of that music goes through that tragus flap and resets that vagus nerve because our vagus nerve innervates right there. I mean, it's just, there's so many different things. I mean, we could go on and on about sound, but it is just healing, and it always has been. When we look at those ancient indigenous cultures, we see that sound healing was a part of that, right? So, um, the Aboriginal cultures of Australia, the Malays that were present in the Polynesian cultures, the use of sound healing in ancient Egypt, the sound healing in the Northern Europe, Asia, and singing bowl. I mean, it just goes on and on because this has just been such a important piece of how we work as humans and our relationship with sound.
I'm just thinking of a very simple example of your mum holding you as a baby in her arms and just singing to you, to soothe you to sleep or something like that. That's a very basic example. But is there any particular frequency? Because some people might be a little bit more advanced in the quantum realm or these more esoteric modalities. Is there any frequencies that you wanted to call out? Because people can use sound generators and things like that. You can even look for frequencies on platforms like Spotify. I know a lot of people like is it the 432 hertz range? So is there any other frequency ranges that you'd recommend? And is there any frequencies you'd recommend for different purposes and uses?
Well, when it comes to frequencies, yeah, we can talk about the 432 and the 528, the solfeggio kind of frequencies out there. But I think it's important to also recognize that each cell, each protein in our body has its own frequency. So making sure that we are exposed to a range of frequencies, I think is really important for us to remember. Um, Not that there's any issue with listening to 432 hertz, right? But if that is the only frequency that we're getting, we are sort of frequency deficient, right? Sound deficient. So making sure that we have a variety of different music, just like we want a variety of different foods to really maintain that microbiome in the gut, right? It's that same sort of idea. That diversity is what we evolved with over millennia. And the same thing applies to sound, that we really do want a robust range of frequencies. And so that's something that I encourage people to explore what frequency resonates with you, and continue to explore, because things in our biology shift, things in our psychology shift, where we're needing a different type of healing and soothing. And sound offers just a multitude of different frequencies for us to use. And I would really kind of point towards our, you know, a subjective experience with that, um, rather than pointing out a list of like, okay, here's this and that, and you do this prescriptive sort of list, that this is your relationship with sound, and cultivate it and make it rich, would be what I would say.
I love that. That's amazing. I think Zoom's going to kick us out. So would you mind if I just jump out? I think we have to wait like 10 minutes and then we jump back in.
Sure, I have a meeting at noon.
What time is it now?
It's 12 for me. It's 12 or 11:43.
Oh, okay. That's all good. What we'll do is we'll reschedule a around two at a later time. But I think that was a good starting conversation.
Absolutely. That was wonderful. I really enjoyed talking with you. And yeah, we can definitely do a round two. Sometimes when I get in the interview mode, I just back to back schedule so that
Yeah. Yeah,
I have
no,
my
no
hair
props.
curled. And
I think I'm up to question two of six or something like that. Because when you get into the flow of the conversation, the time just jumps into hyperdrive. All good.
yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So we'll tee up another catch up and we'll chat again soon.
Okay. Well, thank you so much
Good.
for having me on. It was a pleasure talking with you today.
My pleasure. Speak soon. Bye.
Absolutely. Bye.